Good evening. We're on the air again with another edition of Pachios on the News. And I've said this before, but this one really is an important one. War is raging in the Middle East. The United States and Israel attacked Iran. We all know that Iran is run by religious madmen and thugs, and we'd all like to get rid of them, and we think the world would be a lot better off without them. We're all agreed on that. Mm-hmm. What we may not be agreed on is the strategy here, and we don't know about the tactics. But we have somebody as a guest tonight who knows a lot about this stuff, who knows very much about these things. He's a four-star admiral, retired, Gregory Johnson. He's a native of Maine. He lives in Maine. He was for 30 some odd years in the U.S. Navy, a carrier pilot, and commander of the 6th Fleet. Before that, commanded a carrier task force. He graduated the Naval War College, head of the United States Navy forces in Europe, head of NATO forces in South, what they call NATO
Southern Europe.
NATO South, and he can tell you other things, and and an aide to the Secretary of Defense and an aide to General Colin Powell when he was head of the Joint Chiefs. So this is our resident expert in Maine, and he kindly agreed to come on this program tonight and give us some perspective on what's happening in this war. So Admiral Gregory Johnson, welcome. Thank you very much. And I should tell the folks, Admiral Johnson grew up in Westmoreland, Maine, which is right near Caribou in very northern Aroostook County, and he's a graduate of the University of Maine. I don't think we've had any other graduates that have been four-star Maine graduates of four-star military. And so he had a unique position to comment on this and unique to guide to our state. So welcome, Admiral.
Well, Harold, it's always a pleasure to be with you. I always like to have discussions with you, and I thank you for that kind introduction, although I think there are many other people who have a lot more knowledge about what's going on today than I do. I think maybe some of you listen to Admiral Stavridis. I believe he's on CNN and what have you, and I would certainly listen to him, General Pachios.
Do you know Stavridis and Pachios?
Yeah. They were in my era.
They were in your. Let me, before we get started, you were brought up in a potato farm in northern Maine, right?
Well, it was a farm, yes.
Yeah, it's a farm. Well, how does and you went to Caribou High School?
I went to Caribou High School, yeah.
And University of Maine in Orono. Mm-hmm. How does a guy from Westmoreland, Maine, get to be a four-star admiral? There are not that many sailors up there. Is this something you had in mind?
I've never even seen a sailboat. And well, it's a long and circuitous route, and it's just a lot of serendipity that came together and a lot of people that helped me. But I aspired to be in the profession that you're in. I wanted to be an attorney and equal justice under law, and I was very passionate about it. And I was the first person from my family to go to college. I was a government major and with one goal, and that's to go to law school. And I had been accepted, but I was back home on Easter of 1968. That Easter vacation, we were shipping potatoes. And the lady at the draft board in Caribou, she had a little office in the back of the post office. She called me and she said, "You better come down and see me before you go back to school." So of course I waited till Friday afternoon, and then I went down to see her and walked into her tiny little office. And she says, "Johnson," she says, "you know, you're going to graduate on Friday, June 8th or June 9th, whatever it was. And on Monday, June 11th or whatever it is, I'm going to send you to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And in 8 weeks, Private Johnson, you're going to be headed for Vietnam." And she said, "But, you know, you've got a college degree, and I'd like to see you be an officer." And so she takes out my folder. She had about 500 of them. All the people she was going to draft had graduated from high school in the Caribou catchment area, and they weren't going to college, or all those who had gone to college and had completed 4 years. They had changed the draft. Everybody was going to get no more deferment. You could have 4 years, but you were still going to get drafted. And she said, and I'll give you 3 months till September 9th, and then you come and show me you've been accepted to an officer program. I won't draft you. And so that was sort of the beginning of that journey, and it was all serendipity. And through a long story, I ended up hearing about something called Aviation Officer Candidate School. And that was where the Navy trained pilots that, and commissioned them, the ones that didn't go through Navy ROTC in college, or that didn't go to the Naval Academy. It was like Officer Candidate School, but it was for aviation. It was in Pensacola. If you've ever seen the movie Officer and a Gentleman, I had a drill instructor just like Lou Gossett. And that's where I got my commission, and then I went through flight training and intended to do the minimum time and come back to the University of Maine Law School. But I ended up, for a variety of reasons, staying in the Navy for 36 years. And
well, you once told me you like to fly airplanes.
I did enjoy flying. I'd never flown airplanes. I flew in one to get to Pensacola.
How many carrier takeoffs do you have?
Well, I'm happy to say that I have as many many landings as I do takeoffs.
Yeah.
And 1,100 of them. I have almost exactly 1,100 carrier landings, about 700 in a day, 400 at night, over about 25 years of my 36 years that I spent flying tactical airplanes.
Did you fly different types of warplanes, or?
I started in something called the A7. It was a single-seat attack airplane. And then as technology got better, we got the FA-18s. We went from, vacuum tubes, huge radars, to circuit boards, and we could then put into a much smaller radar both a ground mapping capability, which tended to be what you needed for an attack airplane, and an air-to-air radar, which you needed for a fighter, and hence we have the FA-18, which in various versions of that is still the heart and soul of Navy's tactical aircraft on aircraft carriers.
Now, of course, the Israelis are a big part of this war in Iran, and Israeli intelligence. I mean, it's the Israelis who killed the leadership.
Correct.
But the U.S. is bombing. Are those Navy jets that
Some
are bombing?
of them are. They're flying off carriers. They're the ones that are doing the bombing. We have one of the carriers out there has a squadron of F-35Cs, and one of the first squadrons to deploy with that aircraft, and the other aircraft carrier has just FA-18. They have both the older FA-18s, F-18Cs, which I flew. They're single seat, and then you have newer versions, F-18Es. It's a bigger aircraft. That's a single seat, and you also have the F-18F, which is a larger two-seater. And they can carry more bombs, have greater range, and what have you. And then you also have an F-18G, which is the electronic warfare airplane. So that's simplified logistics on the carriers to have one so-called type model series that all use the same engines and what have you.
So I want to get started with you by saying that I worked in the West Wing of the White House for Lyndon Johnson during the Vietnam War. And Johnson, he knew this was difficult stuff, but he kept, believing that and being told, bomb them, bomb them, bomb them. And so we bombed Hanoi. We destroyed Hanoi. We bombed the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was the supply trail going to South Vietnam. Bomb, bomb, bomb. And we're the most powerful military, most powerful country in the world. And Vietnam was backward. It was a backward country. So the theory was, we're the United States of America. These guys are toast. But they weren't.
No.
Any similarity here?
Well, there was, I think you could say, or ask the question, is President Trump having an LBJ moment? Because as I mentioned, in March of 1968, President Johnson announced that he was not going to run for president in the November of '68 elections. And we had just had great tactical success beating back the Tet Offensive launched by both the Viet Cong forces in South Vietnam and regular North Vietnamese forces. And over the succeeding, that started in January of '68, and then over the next 6 weeks, we had resounding tactical success, but it did not translate into a political success or an end to the war. It took 5 more years for that war to end, and it brought Johnson down, and we now have started a situation in Iran where some would say that once we started this thing, if we leave it worse than we found it, i.e. with the Strait of Hormuz not reopened to maritime traffic, and the ability of Iran to still continue to threaten us with ballistic missiles and the possibility of building nuclear weapons, is that going to be an LBJ moment for this president? I think things are somewhat different, but we still have the same dilemma where we've enjoyed incredible tactical success. I mean, we have had just incredible success in bringing down the conventional forces of Iran, yet I think it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, certainly if you want regime change, to bring down the Iranian forces. They can still do immense amounts of damage, and as far as the Strait of Hormuz, they don't have to stop every ship. They just have to stop one ship a week, maybe, or one ship a month, and that'll shut the place down, because the way risk works, the insurance and what have you, people aren't going to transit the Strait of Hormuz. They don't have to stop every single ship every single day.
I think you alluded to the fact that it got shut down after the war began. In other words, the oil was moving, the ships were flowing before Israel and the U.S. attacked.
Yes.
There wasn't a problem with the Strait. So that's a consequence
of this war.
Of the war,
yeah. And that's, I was taught early on in my life, the first courses you start going to at the War College and what have you, and they have a planning process. It's the 5 Ps. I call it the 6 Ps, but prior planning prevents poor performance. You can add one more P.
What is the other? Why don't you give us the 6 Ps?
Prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Okay. And so that's what I was taught, and I think there's some truth. And so we started this war, and I'm told that, General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and what have you, advised the president that these things could happen. And if, one would have thought that we would have put forces in place that could address this kind of issue before we started the war. Also, I was taught that the only thing worse than fighting coalition warfare is fighting a war without any allies. And we started this great economic war about a year ago, and we've certainly antagonized a good part of the world, including all of our allies in Western Europe and most of our allies along the Pacific Rim, who are very dependent upon this oil. We did not consult with them. We did not talk to them about this before we did it, and we shut the strait down. And it's true that we have enough fossil fuel that we are producing, but it's a very fungible marketplace, and the scarcity is going to cost the prices to go up. Even though we have plenty of it, we're still going to be paying that higher price
for that commodity. The United States has a surplus of oil, and the president said the other day, fine, if they don't open it up, I don't care whether we ever open it up, we don't need that oil. And people thought, there are people around say, isn't it? He's so right. He's absolutely right. At the same time, it costs $4 a gallon.
Correct.
And with all of our surplus of oil. So I don't get it. You can say all kinds of things to the American people, and some of them believe it.
Yeah, but the fact is the prices will not go down. You have a very fungible product, and it's going to help. I think the biggest winner short term is Russia on this. But Japan in particular, our most erstwhile and loyal ally in the Pacific, gets 90% of they have to import all of their oil, and 90% of it comes from the Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf. And so this is a big hurt on them. The Europeans are somewhat dependent, but not as much as South Korea, Taiwan, Philippines have some of their own oil, but Japan is the one that's hurt the most, and China. China gets a large percent of their imported oil from the Middle East. So you could say they have a bigger interest in keeping the straits open, but I don't think they have the capacity. And the other thing for our allies, they weren't consulted on this, so now they get left with, you break it, you own it, but we're going to appear, the president said today that he's willing to come to some kind of an understanding without opening the Strait of Hormuz, and that the Europeans and the others who have more dependent on that particular oil can fix it. I don't think that is going to work very well. I think to do anything in this day and age, the leadership of the United States is still required to put something together of that magnitude.
Well, you were the commander of NATO Force South, and so you had you commanded a multinational force, I believe. But they were military people from all NATO countries?
Correct. We had, at the time I was there, we had about 45,000 peacekeepers in Bosnia-Herzegovina and 45,000 more in Kosovo at that time. And those were multinational forces, including the Russians.
And you were the commander?
Yeah, I was the strategic commander. I wasn't the tactical commander.
You weren't in Kosovo directing the troops around, but you were the boss.
In Bosnia, we had an American 3-star, and in Kosovo, it rotated between the French and the Italians and the Germans.
And you were based in your
Naples.
Command headquarters was Naples. Did you have on your headquarters staff working for you people with different flags?
Oh, yeah. Everybody. My deputy, when I got there, was a Turkish general. Then I had a Greek general, and that by the time it ended, I believe my deputy was a Canadian 3-star.
So you're a believer in alliances?
Yes. I was taught that, like I said, the only thing, fighting a coalition warfare is very difficult. You have a lot of, you have to be a diplomat. You have to keep people together and everybody has slightly different interests and different perspectives, so it's a chore. Eisenhower was great at it. He kept our alliance together in World War II. I think we have a tradition of that. But we're going this one alone, us and Israel, and we expect them to help us, though. And after we've launched an economic war against the whole world, and then we start this war, it's a little bit of an ask to expect everybody to come to our rescue at this particular moment.
You said something a little while ago about if you've got a strategic goal, and you said regime change and so forth, and you talked about the necessity of good planning and putting forces in place to accomplish the task. So what would that look like? Forces in place to accomplish what we were told at the beginning were the objectives. Securing the uranium buried in the mountains, regime change, things of that sort.
Well, first of all, trying to get the highly enriched uranium out of Iran would be an incredibly complex operation. It would require significant force.
Significant, thousands and
thousands
of American troops.
And you have to fly heavy equipment in there. I mean, it would, I'm not saying it's impossible, but you'd really have to, that would be a major ground operation.
Right.
And very complex, very dangerous.
And how would the troops get there?
Well, you'd have to create an area around the facilities, two different sites where they think that material could be. I mean, a large area. You'd have to have a landing strip, and you'd have to be able to control it. You'd have to have air defenses. You'd have to provide, establish air superiority over it.
Well, air superiority we have. I think.
We have air supremacy.
There's a difference?
With superiority, but we don't have air supremacy.
Oh.
I mean, they can randomly, they could shoot something. And then if you got helicopters and all of that in there, then you're subject to ground fire and shoulder-fired missiles, which IR, infrared missiles. And that's why we do, all the bombs we're dropping now are from high altitude. So you're above all of that ground-based stuff, and then you just have and we've been able to defeat the Russian-provided air defense systems that they have in Iran. And we've also decapitated with other means. The Israelis worked for years to get, when the June War came, they had embedded means of destroying a lot of the surface-to-air missiles that they had. And by the way they did the decapitation of the leadership is through the surveillance systems, ubiquitous surveillance systems that the Iranians have put all over their country to keep track of their population and to keep down dissent. And they've hacked into that.
The Israelis hacked into it.
And so they've been tracking all of these people, everything that
they
they're
know where
doing.
they are all the time.
Yeah.
And I read in a paper yesterday, I think, in the Times, that the regime is in disarray. They're worried about each other. They're worried about Israeli spies. They think they can't get together, and it's very difficult to defend themselves or run this war when they can't communicate openly.
Yeah. Well, and also they don't know the cell phones to see what they did to Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And that also ought to be something that's somewhat concerning to Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi and countries that are autocratic and they have to control their populations. I mean, we ought to be concerned about it. If we can do it, someone else will be able to do it already, or they will soon be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's going to come back and haunt us. So, it's just like my cell phone. Every now and then I'll mention something about, I don't know, fishing. I'll always looking at fly fishing gear, and I turn on my computer and I've got ads from Orvis and everybody else. I don't know how it knows that, but it knows that, and that's what it shows me.
So back to the forces in place. So as I understand from just reading the newspaper, forces in place were moving one carrier group to the region and then a second carrier group to the region, and a Marine Expeditionary Force of how many people, how many Marines is that usually?
About 2,200 Marines.
Yeah.
And then you have the sailors that man the ships, but the actual ARG, Amphibious Ready Group, is a battalion of actual combat Marines. It has a helicopter element. Some of the ARGs even have the F-35Bs that the Marines have bought, which are a VSTOL version of the F-35. They'll have 4 or 5 of those. And then they have the vehicles that can come out of the back of the amphibious ships and carry troops ashore. So it's a pretty robust capability, but it still has to be within 25 miles of the coast, and you have to have air supremacy and sea supremacy.
You're telling me that these Marines, these 2,500 Marines to attack Carg Island or whatever, they don't get flown in from Italy.
No.
You're saying 25 miles away? That's about it? You got to be
yeah,
nearby.
You got to be nearby.
Well, if you're nearby, then the other guys can get you.
Well, unless you've established air supremacy and maritime supremacy so that you can protect the ships while they go. They can take some opposition, but not that much. It's not quite like World War II. We didn't always have air supremacy. I mean, we lost ships, we lost a lot, but we were willing to do that then because we were fighting in a war of survival. There's another big difference too between, say, a World War II that was a war of necessity. Our country had to do it. Since World War II, almost every single war has been a war of choice. And the wars of choice that we've been involved in, say Vietnam, Iraq, in particular, to a lesser extent Afghanistan. The initial war there, I think, was a war of necessity to get the Taliban, but the last 10 or 12 years, I think, was more a war of choice that did not turn out well. And really, since The end of World War II, other than I'd say Desert Shield and Desert Storm, was a war of necessity. But this is a war of choice. Even Ukraine is a war of choice, except it was a war of choice for Russia, not for us, but it was a war of choice. It wasn't a war of necessity. And now that we have attacked Iran, it's a war of necessity for them. And they'll probably pursue it with the same intensity that we pursued World War II, because that was a war of necessity and a war of survival.
The differences, the big differences, obviously.
Huge differences.
Huge differences. But so these two carrier groups and the Marine Expeditionary Force, and I guess some 82nd Airborne people are being positioned.
They're, I'm sure, on some level of a high alert, but they haven't
Why are they
moved.
being sent? I mean, why, if any, but why is the Marine Expeditionary Force there?
I think most of it was done. Again, I don't know, but I'm assuming that was, you know, to back up.
For show.
For show. To try
we're coming, you better cave in.
Tooth to these words that you have to give up,
Yeah.
or that, you know, you're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz for us again.
Yeah.
And they called our bluff. We got there, and you know, those ships are going to have to go through the Strait of Hormuz to get up to Karg Island if that is something you wanted to do. Or take any of the islands in the Strait of Hormuz area, or the Bandar Abbas Naval Base. But again, even if we cleared out the coastal area around the Strait of Hormuz, they don't need to be on the coast to launch those drones. Those drones can go about 1,000 miles, and they can be launched from hidden caves. They can pull them out, launch them, go back in. And
the Iranian Navy's been destroyed, so the Iranian Navy isn't going to stop the Americans from sending those amphibious forces up there.
Well, the Navy can, in the sense that they can still go out and sow mines. They just need something that floats, and they can put mines in the water.
You don't need a fancy ship to lay mines.
You don't need a fancy ship. So from a combatant ship to a combatant ship, they're not going to stop the U.S. Navy or any NATO Navy with ships, but they still have plenty of other things, tools in their kit that they can use. And the force that is disadvantaged technologically will always find some kind of asymmetric way to defeat the enemy or to fight to a stand. Just look at what's going on in Ukraine. We had to look no further than that. And there is
greatly outnumbered.
Completely outnumbered. They've had to be very, very innovative. They're fighting a war of national survival. They have passion. And so Mr. Trump says, well, you should give back the Donbass and you know, basically submit to Russia. Well, again, the things that will keep what Iran will fight for is beyond something that I think are incapable of understanding.
I cut out an opinion piece from the Times written by a guy who I've read before. It's pretty good. So he says, and I'd like your comment on it, I think this is in line with what you're saying. So the familiar errors appear. The war planners imagine that a regime can be decapitated into collapse, whereas external attack often does the opposite, binding a battered state more tightly to a society newly united by injury, humiliation, and rage. That's what you're talking about.
That's what I'm talking about.
And he says, planners who took their adversaries' self-understanding seriously rather than discounting its propaganda might have anticipated that an attack would not weaken the regime's narrative, but instead fulfill it. And now this is stuff that you're a career military officer. This is stuff, I guess, that they do talk about at the Naval War College and other places, is it?
Well, yeah, they teach through case studies, and you have case studies of this, and history is full of it. I mean, take Russia. We're talking about Russia. Well, say in the early part of the 19th century, Napoleon marched across Europe all the way to Moscow, but he didn't think that they would fight and allow their capital city to be burned and still have the resilience. And he left, I don't know, with 100,000 soldiers and marched across Europe, and he got back at the end of this thing with, I don't know, 5,000 of his troops left. He was annihilated by them. And they did much the same thing against the Germans in World War II. So lots of countries have done it, and you can just look at history and see it. And Ukraine is doing it right now. Russia is superior in any way that you want to calculate the strength of a nation, yet they have basically been in trench warfare with drones for 4 years now.
The president has said at different times. First, he said it would, in a few days the war would be over. Now it's 4 to 6 weeks, and they're having a hard time shedding the 4 to 6 weeks. So I think they're stuck with the 4 to 6 weeks. But what you're talking about, asymmetrical warfare, doesn't go 4 to 6 weeks.
No.
It goes years.
Years and years. And I think the other thing is the resilience of Iran. They've been fighting this for decades now. And
even though the people of Iran are not necessarily in love with the thugs who run it.
No, but it's a very well-educated, sophisticated society. They've been suffering economic deprivation now for 5 decades, and I don't know. And their attention span to this and dedication to it is at a level that I don't think that we have with that, nor does I think our leadership has to stick to something that's going to take a long, long time. It's going to be very difficult in lieu of an all-out invasion, and I really don't think that that's a viable option at all.
All-out invasion, we're talking about, well, in Vietnam, we went from 50,000 to 100,000 to 150 to 250, 300, and ultimately 500,000 Americans fought in Vietnam. So this is when, once you're into it, and I know personally what Johnson went through, knowing he was in a quagmire, knowing he could get out, couldn't get out, pleading with the other side to kind of come to the table, which is what we have going on now.
Correct.
We have pleading with the Iranians to negotiate.
Because from our perspective, we've watched our own videos. We've watched all these wonderful things being blown up. We even make cartoons so they can show the president every morning all the stuff they've blown up. But turning tactical victory into strategic victory or strategic win is a very complicated thing. And really, we have not been very successful at it since the end of World War II with unconditional surrender to Germany and Japan. And in fact, for instance, the Korean War is still going on. That's an armistice. It's not a war is not over.
Well, you said something before we began the program that I wrote down. You said, well, it's asymmetrical warfare, and it could be endless. And you said the problem is the U.S. has to win.
Yeah.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, what I mean is, really, all Iran has to do is survive. And they're surviving. I don't think that you can get rid of this regime. And so they're still going to be in place no matter what kind of a political settlement. One person can start this war, and you can say really 2 people started this war.
It's a Netanyahu-Trump war.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, there's going to have to be a political settlement. And that's going to require 2 parties. And
you're saying no, the president announced that his objectives was, and it was easy to achieve, was unconditional surrender. Well, what are the chances for unconditional surrender here?
Well, he hasn't said that for a few days now.
He hasn't said. He did say it a couple weeks ago.
And well, that's not achievable.
Yeah.
And And our country doesn't have the will for that, and I don't think it would be very prudent to try to do that, and I don't think this leadership would try it either. But still, you're going to have to negotiate, and you're not going to end up, the regime will still be in place. I mean, to take a really horrible example is what's gone on in Gaza. I mean, we have literally destroyed the entire Gaza Strip. But Hamas is still there. And that's a government that was detested by the people, but it's still there. And you know, and they continue to pound away at it, and it's still there. Now, Iraq is several times bigger than Texas. It has 95 million people, you know, so much bigger than Iraq, and look what happened there, so much bigger than Afghanistan. And you know,
you said in a highly educated society.
Yes. So you're going to have to negotiate. And so I think, again, the prior planning prevents poor performance. When we have war plans for all kinds of contingencies, and we have lines of, you know, you have this thing you call observe, analyze, decide, act. And this analyze part of it, I believe that he was apprised of the fact that they could close the straits. He was apprised of the fact that this regime is very resilient and what have you, but I think he would have been somewhat encouraged, over-encouraged probably, by watching what happened in June when Iran quickly decided, well, we don't like this, but we've got a pretty good thing going, and let's just stop it before they hurt us anymore. And he thought that this would be the same outcome. But this time it really was a war of national survival for Iran.
He said we're going to demolish the,
And so it's a different, it was a different kind of a war than what June 12th was. And he got Netanyahu to stop bombing on that one. They didn't want to stop. And now we're back at it. So it's a totally different thing. And I'd like, you read something, I want to read you something.
Yeah.
That it says here, this is a piece that I've read recently, but it really struck me. It says, never has so much been seen so precisely by so many people who understand so little of what they are seeing. A system can tell you where a man is. It cannot tell you what his death will mean for that nation. Such systems, our surveillance systems, our intelligence systems, are trained on behavior, not on meaning. They can track what an adversary does, but not what he fears, honors, remembers, or will die for. And at the end of the day, wars are about grievance, sacred narrative, the memory of past humiliations, the desire for revenge. And these are not atmospheric complications added to an otherwise technical enterprise. They are, in fact, what wars are really about.
So the explosions that you see in the videos and TV, and the demolition, and the announcements that we've destroyed their infrastructure, and we're going to destroy their power plants and their desalinization plants, and if they don't do what the president wants immediately, he's given them, I think, he gave them 48 hours and he gave them 6 days, and now I think he's given them to April 8th, and then he's going to demolish them and it'll be all over. What do you think the chances of that happening?
I don't think it's going to happen. And when you get into power plants and desalinization plants, I don't know if it matters. It should matter, but now you're getting into war crimes when you're specifically going after things that hurt the civilian population, which is, of course, what Russia is doing in Ukraine. But still, the resilience of that country and those people, they're fighting a war of national existence. And the regime, we think that is a very noble one. In this case, it's an evil regime, yet for them it's a war of, it's an existential war.
To survive.
To survive. The United States has never ever had to encounter that. We have two oceans. We're somewhat removed from all of this. Our people have been removed for it. They've never been under attack, I guess, since the War of 1812. You know, I think we have a hard time comprehending some of that. Our political leadership now, during the Cold War, 80% of Congress had served in World War II. Now we have only about 15% of our members of Congress and people in positions of national leadership who've ever served in the military or have, shall we say, a first-hand appreciation for all of this. And I know this is not a very kind observation, but it was made by someone who has had positions of significance in our country. General Mattis once said, "I earned my spurs leading Marines in combat, and President Trump earned his spurs going to a podiatrist." And
General Mattis said that, yeah.
And so, you know, I think there's an element of truth. And then, to his credit, he was very successful with the June 12th strikes on Iran. And I thought that was very important, actually. I thought that was a good thing for us to do because
it set back the nuclear program.
It did, but it more importantly showed that the United States could actually do something. Our level and our capacity, despite the incredible amount of power we have, to be able to deter. We backed down when
on the Red Line in Syria.
Well, we backed down in Georgia. We backed down in Crimea.
Yeah.
We backed down in the Donbass.
Yeah.
We backed down with the Red Line in Syria.
Yeah.
We bombed Libya, but then we left.
Right.
So our credibility in being able to say something and to deter, despite the immense force that we had,
right.
We had to reestablishing a deterrent capacity is a very difficult thing to do. And so being part of that successful campaign, I think, was helpful. And I think that this operation had the potential, if we had done the proper prior planning, to set it up in a way where we had the support, the strong support of all of our NATO allies, all our European, Western allies, the whole Pacific Rim from South Korea around to Thailand and New Zealand and Australia with us. Then we could have probably, using diplomatic means and what have you.
Say the world is aligned against you.
And use that kind of I think that's what the Bush administration did with Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And Secretary Baker traveled for months and put together, we got a UN Security Council.
Before we sent the troops.
Before we sent the troops. We had Syrian divisions, we had a French division, we had an international force, and the world was behind us. And I said, I think that was a war of necessity, and we got a lot of deterrent value out of that, and that carried us through. And then we started fettering that away at the end of the Cold War. We withdrew all our forces from Europe. We've been withdrawing forces from Korea and Japan and the Pacific. And so the deterrent capacity of the United States has been harmed. And to reestablish that and to walk away from this once we started it is again going to put us on our heels again and hurt.
That's an interesting point.
So I think this is very harmful.
It's all changing now in the last few days, what the objectives are. And I think Secretary Rubio the other day, yesterday, said, write this down, he said to the reporters. Here's here's our objectives. Destroy the Iranian Navy, destroy the Iranian Air Forces, air power, and destroy factories that manufacture munitions, and destroy their, or diminish, not destroy, their ballistic missile capacity. Those are the four things. He said, that's what we're after. Well,
Those are the things that we have accomplished so far.
And those are the things we've accomplished, and he said that's what we're after, which is a signal they're going to announce at some point, we won.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody will shake their heads. What did we win? And what happened to, we're coming for, get ready folks in Iran, we're coming to help you.
Mm-hmm.
You protesters.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming to help you. We're going to make sure that they no longer have a nuclear capacity.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do all these things, and none of it ever happened.
No.
It can't happen. You're saying that's not realistic for those things to be accomplished in the way we're doing it,
mm-hmm.
alone.
Alone. And so I think if we had brought our allies, like I said, the only thing worse than fighting a war with allies is fighting a war without allies.
Mm-hmm.
If we had taken the time to build a coherent multinational effort, because this is a vile regime, and it can do, if it gets ballistic missile capability that can range across they got to Diego Garcia.
Yeah.
Over 2,000 miles, so they can range Europe right now, and if they can get to our continent, and if they can then build a bomb, I mean, this is a serious issue, and I think this is one of the issues that's going to come out of all of this, both the war in Ukraine and this war. The big lesson is going to be, no one's attacked North Korea, but they attack Ukraine, and we convinced them to get rid of their nuclear weapons at the end of the Cold War. They attacked Iran, and we've been trying to get them to get rid of, get a nuclear weapon.
Who attacked? Who are we talking about?
I'm saying Iran did not have a nuclear weapon.
Oh, yeah.
But if they did, would we have attacked them? And so I believe that now there's going to be a proliferation of nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, even Japan and South Korea are going to have to think about this, because can you trust the United States to support you? And I think there could be proliferation in Europe. And so these are some of the big issues that are now going to come out of what has been going on here with our lack of support to Ukraine.
Don't you think we're at a stage in post-World War II history where the bomb was developed, that we got to live with with a lot of people having the bomb. The Israelis got the bomb, the Pakistanis got the bomb, the Indians have the bomb.
Well, I think we're still better off the more we can limit it.
No question about it.
And we've been successful, South Africa.
But how do we do it? Is there any way to limit the Iranians?
I think we'll have to do it through diplomatic and political means, and not through military force.
I think that's
because they're at the point where it would require probably a full-scale invasion. So thinking these things through, doing the prior planning, doing all the what-ifs, which, at least in my way of thinking, we do all of those things. All of that was available, but you can, when you have people who will only hear what they want to hear, which often happens, it's difficult to convince people to do this.
You know, I'm an old guy. I've been around a long time, and I've been around in politics and government with what I call establishment people. And they're condemned these days. The establishment is condemned, but leadership is difficult. Diplomacy is very difficult. Making decisions, global decisions that have global impact, is difficult stuff. It's not simple. It's not like selling condos. It's not saying, this is the best bathroom you will ever find. I'm the greatest developer in the world. You're lucky to have an apartment you can buy from me. It's not that easy.
And if we were to be able to negotiate some kind of, I mean, the treaty wasn't a great one, but we did have something in 2015 that entailed verification.
Right.
And the technical aspects of that were incredibly complex, and it took 2 years to do it. So sending 2 real estate guys to negotiate a treaty with Iran on they don't have the capacity. They don't have the technical knowledge to even be able to do it.
They'll say that the others, that they were losers. We know how to do these things. We know how to make deals.
But even if we were to make a deal, you still have to implement it and see that it gets carried out. And that requires a long-term, you need diplomats. You need to have people in our embassies to work with our allies, to work with the countries that we're trying to influence. Hopefully, if that were to happen, we would eventually have reestablished diplomatic relations in Tehran as well. And you got to have people that can carry out U.S. policy in the long term. And that's another problem we've had since the end of the Cold War, because over the decades after the end of World War II, we had, in the beginning of the Soviet Union, we had roughly a national strategy that lasted for several decades. It was based on containment of the Soviet Union. And our allies in Europe more or less agreed with this, and our allies in the Pacific Rim agreed with this. And from a Republican to Democratic administration through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they had variations as governments changed in the 80s, but it was still a national strategy that was coherent enough to get us on the same page. And it went from administration to administration. And now we don't really have a national security strategy, let alone one that we have buy-in from both Democrats and Republicans. And this, I think, is harmful to us. And so we bounce from one thing to another. And we've lost, I think, the credibility of our nation, our ability to deter. And at the end of the day, our leadership is profoundly important to the rest of the world, whether we like it or not. And I think that the gains that we have from that much outweigh what it might cost us or the effort that it takes to do that. And one of the biggest things is the dollar being the
currency of the world.
Yeah. And we stand to lose all of that. So there are other things that we need to work on too, our procurement systems, the kinds of weapons, the lessons that have come out of Ukraine, so we have a lot of things to work on right back here at home. And I'd say the other thing, is national debt. We just ran through 39 trillion. We're stacking it up at 3 trillion a year. And we really do need to work on these things to maintain our stature and standing in the world and the well-being of the American people. And that is all part of, I think, national defense. That's the first and ultimate duty of a government, is to provide for the common defense in all of its many dimensions, both economically, militarily, and what have you. And we're beginning to, I think, lose sight of that. I'd hope that isn't the case, but maybe some of this will cause a national reckoning with some of these challenges.
You're talking about diplomacy, you're talking about leadership, you're talking about domestic issues, you're talking about spending. And I'm listening to this and I'm saying, here's a guy who's a warrior, fighter pilot, carrier fighter pilot, senior American military leader, you, in your career, and this is what you're talking about. It's much more complex, you're saying, than just press the button and send the planes and bomb them and it's all over.
When I was a lieutenant, I had an opportunity to go to the Naval War College. And they had a trial program. They had 6 lieutenants. To go to the Junior War College, you had to be a lieutenant commander. And I volunteered for that. And so it was a transformative moment in my career. And I was thinking I was an aviator and I was flying airplanes off carriers, and that was really neat. And then I started, well, maybe there's a reason why our government spends all this money to do this. And while I was at the War College, I began to realize I was in the national security business. I wasn't necessarily, the aviation was just a means towards an end. The end was I was in the national security business, And the measure of effectiveness is peace. My business in the military was peace. And so that's how I began to view the profession I was in, and that's why I stayed in. I found that very gratifying. And peace comes...
You didn't think you were in the Department of War.
No, I was in the Department of Peace, and that is why you have an armed force, to provide peace and the common defense of the people. And so when I put it in that context, I found it to be a very gratifying and rewarding profession, and that's why I stayed in it. And so peace through strength, you do have to have strength, you do have to have the ability to deter, and you do have to be a country that people look up to and who they trust and has credibility. And in the long run, because of the size of our country, our incredible economic power that we have, on the whole, we've made lots of mistakes, but I think it is still the best form of government of all the kinds of governments there are, and it is the kind of government that creates a society that is able to harness the incredible capability of each individual citizen to the greater common good. And I don't think that throughout history there has been anything as effective as the system of governance that we have, and it's something that needs to be nurtured and taken care of from day to day to day, and it will not happen on its own. And I think we have got to remember that and come back to some of these basics. And we still have, our leadership is important throughout the world, and our military power is important to be used in the proper way. So I think of national security in that sense. I was in the peace business.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap this up with the Admiral. Listen to what he said, and don't listen to what Pete Hegseth says. Thank you all for watching.